All right, are you guys seeing it from the beginning now? Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm very excited to share this with you guys. I know you have a little bit of, you guys have helped me a lot through this process, so I'm sure you're familiar with a little bit of what I've been working on, but my thesis presentation is on how an accountant's ethical framework can influence their decision making. So this project was a Qualtrics survey, and I took some analyses of the data. So the main idea is that in ethics, you have three main forms of how to live an ethical life, three main theories. And these theories are consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics. Consequentialism is mainly focused on the consequences of your actions. So what you do, how it affects the people around you, how it affects the world at large. Deontology focuses mainly on your duties, what you're supposed to accomplish, and what that makes things ethical or not. And then virtue ethic is focused on your actual character and the virtues that go into making something right or wrong. So if accounting students tend to gravitate towards one of these three ways of thinking, firms, governing agencies, they can potentially focus on one area of an audit more thoroughly so their auditors aren't tempted to allow potentially unlawful activity under the guise of ethical thinking. So the thing there is, for example, the trolley problem is very popular in popular culture, and I imagine you guys are familiar with it. The basic premise is that the subject here in the center is given a scenario where they have to decide between allowing 5 people to be hit by the trolley, or they can pull the lever and change the direction of the trolley so it only hits one person. Someone who focuses on consequentialism, so the consequences of your actions, would say, okay, there's an option to lose 5 or to lose 1. The ethical decision is to lose the 1. But someone who's focused on virtue ethics, who's more concerned with the virtues and the characteristics that killing is wrong, may think that it's more morally right and just to ignore the situation and allow whatever's going to happen. Because if you go out of your way to take away someone's life, then you're the problem. So that can really affect particularly auditing situations, but in accounting it can make a huge difference. Obviously not life and death, but it can definitely make an impact on how accounting procedures are done. So along with students' major, in the Qualtrics survey, I got a lot of demographic data. So I asked about religious status, gender identity, the size of their hometown, and I had them rank less than 10,000, 10,000 to 60,000, and then greater than 60,000. Prior education and ethics, and several other criteria. The idea is I wanted to see, along with whether or not they're an accounting major and how that influences their decision making, how all of these other demographic factors made a difference. So I did take some inspiration from prior works to help me actually set up the survey and set everything up to work a little better. The first one I looked at was an examination of moral development within public accounting by gender, staff level, and firm. This was published in 2010 by Drs. Richard Bernardi and Donald Arnold. It looked at professional ethics in accounting firms, and it used what they called the Defining Issues Test, which is a self-reporting ethics questionnaire, to look at how ethical and how morally just members of the firm were across all different levels. So they specifically divided male and female, and then different rankings within the firm from associate all the way up to partner. Their findings concluded that generally male participants are less ethical than female participants, and then these male participants are far more likely to be in positions of authority. So being a director or being a partner was far more common if you were a male. So this potentially could pose a serious issue in public accounting firms, obviously on the diversity side, but also in terms of keeping that ethical persona. Because it's very important for an accounting firm to be deemed as ethical, because if they're going to give audit opinions, they have to be, free of bias and morally just. And for that to be possible, there has to be some changes going forward in public accounting.
Do you know if it were the males that were at the lower level versus the males at the higher level of partner? Which set of those were more ethical or less? They
were able to find that in all levels, males were generally deemed less ethical, but it became more prominent as you moved up the rankings. So a male associate versus a female associate, there was a bit of a difference, but it wasn't substantial, but it was a difference. But then once you got up to those partner type levels, it became very pronounced. You had female partners who scored wildly differently from male partners. Another one that I looked at was the directional effects of discussion on auditors' moral reasoning. This was written by Drs. Linda Thorne and John Hartwick on informal communication during the audit process. So in any audit, you have the formal questions you're supposed to ask, you have the formal conversations that everyone watches take place, but you also have conversations that happen in the audit room that aren't quite as scripted, that aren't quite as formal. And these situations force auditors to face ethical decisions head on. They have to talk about them very frankly, they have to look at them as is, and it makes it more personal. They found that it made a major difference in ethical auditing practices because you were forced to actually talk about what you did while you did it, and it didn't allow you to just write things off to GAAP procedures or legality. So it forced people to take personal responsibility and made audit decisions generally more accurate and more ethical. So this needs to be encouraged by firms going forward, and hopefully further research will continue to be done on this. The final article that I looked at was What is a Good Forensic Accountant? A Virtue Ethics Perspective. It was written by Dr. Howieson, on virtue ethics and forensic accounting. Very commonly in forensic accounting, there is a misconception that just because something is legal, that it is ethical. And as we've seen many times throughout history, that is not always the case. Just because something is legal does not necessarily make it ethical. So virtue ethics, just by the nature of what it is, relies on traditional wisdom and morality to make decisions. So that generally helps with forensic audits and makes them more accurate and more ethical, because much like in an audit, you're forced to take a more personalized approach to it. It's not simply, did they break a law, did they do something legal, but did they do